do not assume anything about anyone. It is not like they are living their own full ass experience. It's not questioning why. It's not questioning what they're feeling. It's questioning how can I be a better human and acknowledge who you are and what you're going through. By just understanding that it is not your experience to question. These attacks on our community are like, we're like, how in the hell can we even be dealing with this when 50 years ago our community was dealing with the same thing? But now we all very likely know somebody or some people that are members of the community, and it's important to know how to be an ally, how to be an advocate for the community. The sooner we get past this idea that like men have to fit into a certain box, women have to fit into a certain box, and that those are the only two people who have boxes, I'm telling you, the sooner we'll all be able to coexist.
Happy hello, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you're listening to this or watching this. I just want to say welcome back to your Heard It Here podcast with me, your girl TC Heard, and I'm super excited today because one, I already feel like it's just going to be one of those days, okay? She has her fan out because she is, it's going to be fun. But two is because I have someone super special here today who I love having conversations with because they are always insightful, educational, and they're really fun. So today we are in the middle of Mental Health Awareness Month because mental health is important. But we're going into Pride Month, which is all of June, and there's so many different Pride events around. But I wanted to bring in someone who can have a transparent educational conversation on about how we as allies can be better allies to our friends, family members of the LGBTQ plus community. So without further ado, I want to welcome you, one of DC's finest public educators. Okay, he is one of the finest public educators, Vin Testa.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you
How
so
are
much.
you?
I
Oh,
am
thank
so
you.
good. Yes, I am so pumped to be here. I'm absolutely honored that you chose me to talk to today. But I'm just excited.
Oh, thank you. I'm super excited to have you here. So, you have been in public education for about 10 years. And what is that? First of all, let's get to know you first. Not a lot of folks know you. Let's get to know you. I like to just jump straight in. I have to learn how to do
Yeah,
this.
we gotta do the intro. Yes.
Exactly. Tell us a little bit about yourself then and why you think this a conversation is important today.
For sure. So my name is Vin Testa. I use he, him pronouns. However, when I'm with people that I'm comfortable with, any are fine. As you said, I've been in education this is my 10th year of education, though I took a little bit of a break during the pandemic. I started teaching in DC public schools in 2011 when I moved down to DC. And I taught in the classroom until 2020, took a little break, and that's where you and I met in my capacity at Vita Fitness. But I recently, last August, jumped back into the education world as a student affairs manager at another high school. And I'm so pumped to be back. But throughout that time, I should say, I've also been what is called an LGBTQ liaison within DC public schools. So I received training to bring back to my colleagues and friends so that we could support our LGBTQ identifying youth. Oh, and you said, sorry, you asked me why this conversation was important. And I mean, the number one most important part of this conversation is the fact that at this point, it's estimated that about 1 in 5 people identifies as a member of the LGBTQ community, or at least as an identity within that community. So we all very likely know somebody or some people that are members of the community. And it's important to know how to be an ally, how to be an advocate for the community. So this conversation is always important.
Thank you for sharing that, because I love seeking out knowledge. And I remember our days when we were working together at Vita, you were always open to have a conversation and educate, because I had a lot of questions. So that was
Absolutely.
the perfect reason for me picking you. I'm happy to hear that, DC's public schools, they are giving formal training. That's important. But that's another reason why I picked you, because you're always willing to educate and
Thank
just
you.
like, hey, it's okay. Because there are some people, who feel uncomfortable asking the questions, and they'll just wrongfully, we'll say, offend someone before at least asking. If you don't know, ask, folks. It's okay. So
Absolutely.
let's get
Yeah,
into it.
I always tell people, like, I can I am much more comfortable with ignorance due to lack of education as opposed to ignorance due to anger or hatred.
Mhm.
So as long as you're willing to have a conversation, as long as you're willing to be educated, it makes things so much easier.
That it
Uh,
does.
yeah. So and DC public schools have actually been on the forefront for a lot of this work, making sure schools are safe and inclusive. I mean, since I started back in 2011, but they're always on the forefront of being those spaces for their students.
That's very important to that DC is doing that. I went to middle school in DC, but I don't remember it being as open with
No,
with
no.
that.
Definitely not. I mean, definitely not when you and I were in school.
Hmm.
But then again, I even think back to when you and I were in school, I didn't feel comfortable being out. And, I graduated high school in '07, and I never would have imagined. I never, ever, ever would have imagined. And that's not to say that people around me didn't make me feel supported, or, my parents, you know, I have a dear family friend who is gay.
Hmm.
I was around it all the time, and I never felt unsupported, but I didn't necessarily feel comfortable or supported, in an environment when we were growing up.
And as I'm thinking, I graduated 3 years after you, and I like right across, I'll say, what, the bridge or the river, right at Oxon Hill High School, which is in the National Harbor area. And I'm thinking of some of the individuals that I did know at the time that were a part of the LGBTQ community. And I remember there was one guy who used to come to school with like his wig, and with their wig and their like skirt and their dress. Like sometimes I'm gonna say they were looking better than me because I was pulled up a little dusty.
Mm,
But I remember them getting suspended for technically breaking the uniform rule because they weren't dressing according to their gender assigned and or their sex
mhm.
assigned. And I never really understood that, because in my head I was just like, okay, well, if they want to be fabulous, then they can be
Right,
fabulous. But
right.
what is it really hurting any of the rest of us when half of us aren't really wearing the uniform anyway?
And that's key. That's so key. And when you're in particularly like schools with dress codes or uniforms, you still have to hold those students accountable. Like they still need to be falling into the dress code. But
Hmm.
if, let's say, they were assigned male at birth, but they are presenting as female, or I shouldn't even say presenting as female. They're dressed in feminine, what we associate as feminine clothing. Um, they still have to follow the rules, right? Like, so if the skirt has to be 5 inches, no more than 3 inches above the knee, that goes for that student as well.
Hmm.
And before we go any further, I want to note that you said you use a couple terms or ways to speak that people may not be familiar with. So I think the number one thing right off the bat is just to know, like, LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and either queer or questioning, depending on the person.
Okay.
And then also when we say assigned at birth, what we're saying, I'm applauding you for that, for
Oh,
just
thank you.
doing that research and knowing. But like for those who don't know why we're saying it that way, I always tell people when I do trainings or when I'm in conversation, we say assigned at birth because we didn't come out of the womb being able to talk or advocate for ourselves or
Hmm.
experience gender, right? So, like, We were assigned that. It was given to us, just like our name was. But we didn't pick it. I don't know that I would have gone back and come right out of the womb and been like, yeah, I want my name to be Vin. I don't know that. It fits me. And so does the gender they assigned me. And I'm lucky in that sense, but not everyone is. So that's why we're sort of distinguishing assigned at birth versus just gender.
I appreciate that because I was gonna tell like a little story of before I got to Vita Fitness, I was in fine dining for a few years, and I remember, and I worked at the McCormick and Schmicks at the National Harbor, and I remember individuals coming in where I presumed them to be male, although they were presenting female in female clothing, and I said, "Sir." Because when you're working, sometimes when you're working and you're moving really fast, it's like clockwork, and you're kind of like in this tunnel vision of like just going through the shift. If you've ever
I
worked
do
at
it
a
all the time, even when I'm
yeah,
not in tunnel vision. It's ingrained in
and
us.
I got chewed out, and I felt so bad because I wasn't doing it intentionally, but I didn't realize how like ingrained like gender roles, and if you see someone like that's masculine presenting in body form, but maybe in a different style of clothing that goes with a different gender, it didn't really associate to me because we were always taught like Miss, Mr., Sir, ladies, gentlemen, and from that moment on, I realized that if I had a question or if I didn't know, I would just say they them. When I got to Vita, it it was very eye-opening experience. I'll say for me, that was the first time I was around like very ingrained into the LGBTQIA plus community. And I had a lot of questions just because I'm like, I want to be better supportive. But even though I don't understand what's happening, I want to understand just because I like knowledge. I like just wanting to know, like just understand, honestly.
Right.
It's like, some people just need to know the why behind something. So I remember saying my first they them, and someone thanking me was just like, "Have you ever asked about pronouns before?" And I said no. And could you tell us a little bit about why pronouns are so important and why we actually should be asking about them now?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, I think it's what I always tell people is it is more respectful to ask than it is to not ask, as you found out. We are sort of just ingrained in being polite, right? Sir, ma'am, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the typical terms because that's what we were taught and sort of just brought up to do. I tell people, if you're addressing a group of people or you're addressing someone, I started to lead with like friend, like, hey friend, if it's, I don't know, that's me personally. But when I talk to other educators or I'm training people who work with groups of people, regardless of their age, I tell them use things like scholars, folks. Folks may make you feel old by saying it, but that's just because we haven't reintroduced it as a gender neutral term. So when you're in a school, you get scholars, young people. But if you're with adults, folks, friends, whatever you want to use, it just is a little more inclusive. But it's important to ask so that everyone feels comfortable and everyone feels represented. If you are, if you're confused about the gender that the person identifies with, all it takes is, hey, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I want to be respectful, and ask what your pronouns are so that I can refer to you in the appropriate way. That is a very simple question to ask. And if anything, the person who is receiving that question will feel appreciated and seen. If they combat that with some sort of, you know, if they get in their feelings for you asking, that's on them. That's what I always say to people. As long as you ask, you're doing the right thing. There's always tone, there's always the way you ask. So, I'm happy to give a script, but it's as simple as, hey, I'd like to be respectful of your identity. Can you tell me which pronouns you use? And if somebody combats that with any disrespect, then that's their fault.
I appreciate that. Because I'm going to go to my log of questions now because I had wrote down a few.
Yeah.
So one of my questions is, we know that we live in a very, very, let's just say,
trying time.
Trying, yeah, that's a great word. Trying times in
Yes.
America and what our societal landscape looks like. What are some specific challenges that the LGBTQIA plus community faces, and how can like me, even as an ally, and even our listeners contribute to creating a more inclusive environment? Because you definitely talk about inclusivity.
For sure. Before I do that, we did move from LGBTQ to LGBTQIA. So I want to
Okay.
make sure the I stands for intersex, and
Mhm.
A usually stands for asexual and or ally, if we're including our allies there. So those are intersex is a refers to gender, while asexual refers to sexual orientation. You're about to get me into a whole training session.
It's
Uh,
fine. I like training. Hey, I'm learning.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
teaching me more things as well, because I was
yeah,
my next question. I was like, I wonder what these other two stand for. I
yeah.
thought I knew, because they like you said, they interchange a lot depending on the context.
Yeah, those acronyms interchange all the time. Obviously, we want to be as inclusive as possible, but
Mhm.
and I certainly don't speak for anybody within my community. I speak to my own experience, but
Mhm.
I find that LGBTQ usually encompasses a lot for folks, but it is more inclusive to also add on that IA. And again, sorry, before I answer your question, it is important to note like sexual orientation does not necessarily indicate your gender identity.
Ah,
And your
okay.
gender identity does not necessarily indicate your gender expression. So you know me personally, so you know
Mhm.
that I do drag and I have fun every now and then. And even when I'm not doing drag, back when my knees and my feet could handle it, I as a man would wear heels out to the club. And so I still identify my gender identity is still male, but my expression may be female or maybe considered feminine. So those things I always remind people are very different, and they
Mhm.
don't have to match. I could wear a dress tomorrow and keep this full beard, masculine face, and all that, and still identify as a man. But that's not dictating how I
So
dress or
what
how I
you're
express.
saying is, before we answer the next question, so what you're
Right.
saying is definitely it could be fluid. Like there is no particular box for anything.
Absolutely.
That's the importance of inclusivity, is that everyone can just have the freedom to be themselves and express themselves
For
how
sure.
they feel is important to them. It
Yes.
doesn't have to fit into anybody's role or anybody's norm that we were pretty much grown up and taught.
Absolutely. We were taught that there is a binary, that there are two boxes you fit into, male or female. And we were also taught that in that box goes your gender identity and your gender expression, and in many cases, your sexual orientation. But that is
Mhm.
not the case. There is a wide spectrum of gender, there is a wide spectrum of sexual orientation. And so when we do things like when I do things like wear a dress. When even something as silly as it may sound, as women wearing pants, that was a big deal. And now obviously they've been pants have sort of been feminized and things like that. But
Mhm.
like that was deemed tomboyish or whatever it was back then. So we all fit somewhere along the spectrum, and not a single one of us is on the same point. That, in my
Okay.
opinion, there are plenty of people who are stuck in certain places, maybe
Mhm.
together, but most of us have our own place on all of those spectrums. Um, and I mentioned sexual orientation does not necessarily match with gender identity. Like you can absolutely have a heterosexual man. There are plenty of them in this world who enjoy dressing up in women's clothing or what is deemed as women's clothing.
Mhm.
The sooner we get past this idea that men have to fit into a certain box, women have to fit into a certain box, and that those are the only two people who have boxes. Um, I'm telling you, the sooner we'll all be able to coexist and just mind our own business. That's the best part. Is it's really just about minding your own damn business.
Drinking your water. Hang on. Drinking water and mind your business.
Maybe I promise you'll be happier if you just live your own life and mind your own damn business. But going back, what was your question again?
It's okay. I was going to ask it. I appreciate that because even when you had said the thing about the women's pants, I remember when I was in high school, my mom is like a big diva.
Mhm.
But I had a whole emo phase. You know, we all had it, especially around that time.
Same.
And all I wore was like ripped jeans and t-shirts. When I say she used to throw my jeans in the trash, and
Yes.
she set a pair of my graphic tees on fire. Like, I'm serious. I am so serious because she kept saying was, "I'm not gonna have you looking like a tomboy. I'm
Yep.
not gonna have you walking around here looking like a man. Like you are going to look like a little girl. Like you're gonna like." But it was more the stuff that she was picking out was just ugly. Like I didn't
Yeah.
like it. Plus, I felt comfortable just expressing myself like in jeans and a t-shirt. Like I was in high school, like
Mhm.
listening to rock bands and doing other things I shouldn't have been doing. But
Right.
either way, that like you said, that point could be taken. Like, well, what if I'm wearing pants? Now it's so normalized that women are wearing pants, it doesn't matter. But I
Right.
appreciate
And
that. I
that
just
I
wanted
guess that I guess was like a first hump, right? Like let's let women at least wear something that's not a dress or a skirt so that they
Mhm.
don't have to be sexualized every time they walk down the street. We're still not there yet, but at
No,
least
we're not.
wear pants.
Right?
That's
Because I
wild.
feel like anybody is always like we are all sexualized
Mhm.
regardless of what we put on because of
Mhm.
other people's ideas or temptations or urges or whatever. So that's on that person, not on us.
Absolutely.
That goes for men and women because it happens to all of us.
Absolutely.
Um, but
That's
the
for a
original
different
question, huh,
conversation.
I'm sorry. Oh yes, the
That's
original
for a
question.
different conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know what? Maybe for a different month.
That's a
But
whole separate podcast.
it sure is. But the original question was, what are some specific challenges the LGBTQIA plus community faces, and how can our listeners and even allies contribute to creating a more inclusive environment?
That's a great question. On a national stage, I mean, there are laws in damn near every state at this point that are being argued or brought to their state house floors or whatever it may be, um, that essentially outlaw being a member of the LGBTQ community on any, name the spectrum, and there is some person in some state house somewhere advocating against it and trying to create a law to ban it. So that's on a national level. And what we all need to remember is there will always be somebody who is facing a struggle that we are not. So I guess my advice there is like when you go to a voting booth, when you volunteer places, when you give your time to or money to organizations or candidates, think about the issues that you may not face but that somebody you love faces. So if you have somebody who is LGBTQ identifying in your life, understand that like elections are not just one issue. um, at least for those who don't identify. For folks within the community, and not all of them unfortunately, but for folks within the community, elections are one issue, right? And it's our rights, it's my rights, my right to marry, my right to adopt, my right to work, my right to be, and so on a national level or even on a local level, my advice to allies is, vote in a way that is inclusive and safe. Vote for candidates who quite frankly, who don't even need to put their stance on LGBTQ rights on their platform because they are advocates and they understand. Um, but in like day to day life, uh, you know, things like gendered language, like I was talking about, things like, when you're talking to somebody, God forbid you're able to get personal with them. Don't just say, if you were to ask me, do you have a girlfriend? Most people know when I open my mouth that not to ask me that, but don't just jump to gendered questions or I should say heteronormative questions. And by heteronormative, I mean the way that our society normalizes heterosexuality as opposed to giving other people of other sexual orientations an opportunity to thrive. So those are like, I said a lot, but those are like little things, but also big things. Another one is like, call it out when you see hatred. If it's an unsafe situation, find somebody who can call it out or assist or help. But we still have people being openly gay bashed or queer bashed out on a street, and nobody steps up to say something. Establishments gay bars are being targeted with violence, and nobody's stopping it. Like those things. I'm not saying everybody has to go out there and be a hero, but if you check somebody for their language, or you check somebody for their hatred, that is a big deal. It might seem small, but it's a big deal.
Thank you. You dropped a whole lot of little nuggets in there, and I want to like see if I can hit all of them.
Yeah, for sure.
The first one was definitely about checking someone's. You know what? I'm going to do something different. I'm going to, because my thoughts run a lot. I'm going to do it check by check first. So the one thing you had talked about was checking. The last thing was checking someone when things are happening. Like, we understand it doesn't have to be a hero. Nobody's out here asking you to be Captain Super Save a Ho. Like, it's like, we're just saying, like, when it happens and you see it, like, stand up for somebody. No one's saying you have to bring like violence into a situation. It could be just as easy as, hey, like, that's not cool. Don't say this, because I'll say that there were members of my family who used to always say the F word. And I'm like, yeah, we cut that. Like, we don't say that at all. Like, that's absolutely not okay.
The F word, that's a slur.
It's a slur, and we're not going to say it on here. But
no, I know. I just mean not the F word. Not the F word. The slur.
The slur that rhymes with maggot. So and I was just like, that's not okay whatsoever. And when it comes to certain, oh my God, dogs, sorry. When it comes to certain language or slurs, or there's slang in every different community, do you feel it's okay if your allies or even people within your community use those slurs against each other?
So if we're talking, I think that's two separate things. If no, I don't mean to say it like that, but when we're talking about allies, no, I don't think any allies should be able. I would never say the N word to even my Black friends. Like, that's insane to me. So if you are a heterosexual identifying person, you should not be using the F word or anything like that, or any of it. I think within the community, just as the N word has been reclaimed by Black folks as a term of love, or however you want to view it, I do say the F slur to my other friends, and it is when I've established that I can, and we are close enough that I can use that, and B, it is truly out of love and reclamation to empower myself and others. So,
but it's situational.
It is absolutely situational, and if there are folks within the LGBTQ community who allow their straight identifying or cisgender friends to use certain slurs, because now, I apologize for actually saying it, but I do want to identify it. The term tranny is like not necessarily, it's frowned upon by many, but also, it is a term of empowerment and love in particularly queer communities of color. So like, and that's how many, trans women, not many, let me not quantify, but that is how some trans women of color still identify. They love it. They'll self-identify, but I would never say it personally, just because I don't know them like that, or I don't feel comfortable, because I have been educated on its slur usage. So it truly is situational. It's about the person who self-identifies. That's another point of some of my trainings that I've given, is like, if a person self-identifies, like if I sit here and say I'm queer, I identify as queer, then sure, you can refer to me when you're talking about me, not as a queer. It's not a noun. That's when we get derogatory. But also, if you're telling people how I identify, then yes, you can refer to me as such. That doesn't mean you could then come to me and say, hey, queer, or hey, you know, whatever. That's not what that is.
I was clutching. I was like, "Where's the
Yeah,
pearls?"
that's when we do get, that's when we do become derogatory. But
Mhm.
you know, it's a matter of respect to the person who utilizes it. So if they
Okay.
self-identify, if I sit here and say you could call me a fag, then sure, do it when we're together, but not when I'm not there, and quite frankly, not when the wrong people are around.
Yep. So we're going to go back to the point of it is definitely situational based. Because
Yes,
again, we're going to reiterate that neither one of us are like advocates and speak for our entire community. The first thing
absolutely.
that popped up in my head was I don't know if you watched South Park. It was that South Park episode where Randy said the N word, and
Oh
they're
yeah,
like, "Well, you think Jesse Jackson just speaks for the whole Black community?" Neither one of us speak for our whole community, but it is just coming from our experiences. I just want to make
for
sure
sure,
that's laid out.
for sure.
Me personally, I think I'm just gonna go with no. I'm not
Right,
gonna say that
right, and that's
because
what most
for
people
me, I
do.
feel so comfortable.
Right,
Um, and be just because it's just like I've seen even with working at certain places, I've just seen a lot of like emotions be tied to those certain words, and me myself being called outside of my name for being Black, for being a woman, for being even mixed, and in different spans all across America where I've gone, being called out of my name any type of slur. it's like I said, it's hard.
it
I'm not
doesn't
going to
end
sit here and say that there are some times I don't have my little curse moments and have these moments, but I just, if there is someone else that's in a marginalized community, I think me personally, I would like steer away from it. Even if you say, hey, it's okay, I'm like, okay. If you say it's okay, but I'm just like, no, let's just go to pronounce your name.
yeah,
For me, let's
yeah.
do that.
And I mean, there, even within the community, like
Hmm.
queer is a good example because folks in the older generations are very uncomfortable with the fact that the community has sort of reclaimed it because they were, you know, they were bashed for it back in the day, you know?
Mm.
So for a lot of young folks who identify as queer or use it as an identifier, a lot of older folks are like, hold on. Like I remember being a part of a LGBTQ organization, and we were, I think the acronym for our organization in the mission statement actually stopped at T. And so the oh my goodness, the issue was brought up to include Q, and there was debate about it because a lot of the folks who had been in the organization for a while were like, no, because I don't identify as queer and I don't like that term. And so I distinctly remember standing up in front of the room when comments were allowed to be given and saying, no, this is not your job. You know, it's not your job to police how others identify, but also like if we're going to remain a part of the conversation, if we're going to remain a modern organization, we need to move with the times. And while I certainly don't think that queer should be a part of everyone's vocabulary, because again, it's about intention. If somebody self-identifies, then you are able to refer to them as such.
Is queer different from gay?
Yes, I always tell people queer. Well, again, it sort of depends because like gay
Mhm.
for a while was also used as like an all-encompassing term. Even lesbian women were referred to as gay, and some still identify as gay before the term lesbian became more popularly used. And that stems from issues between the two communities that we won't necessarily get into today. But queer is all encompassing. You know, queer is like I don't really love, maybe I don't really love saying I'm gay. Maybe the person I love is not on the is not male or female. Maybe they identify as non-binary. So that's, you know, because technically gay is man loving a man, lesbian is woman loving a woman. So when a non-binary person comes along and or you know, and you fall in love with them, you're not gay, you're not a lesbian. What are you? You're queer. So it's an all-encompassing term. I even say for gender and sexual orientation.
I like that. Thank you for letting me know that, because I definitely just learned something new. Another nugget that you had dropped earlier was about voting, and even though yes, we still want to keep with drink your water, mind your business,
Yeah.
but when it comes to voting and your actual voice, I believe that's so important, because even if we saw like a few years ago the overturning of Roe v. Wade, like that affected so many different women, and I started thinking from the perspective of, even if when you start to think that certain things like that when it comes to a ballot does not apply to you, it does, because it's
Yes.
not just about like getting on a drag queen for reading to a school, which has nothing to really do with anything. It's not just about, like a woman actually being able to have emergency care, which was just overturned a few weeks ago. In a span of like when her life is at stake, it affects all of us, because it affects our reason to be and to live and to exercise our rights as human beings. So when it comes to, because we're back, and almost seems like we're back at the same type of show. Pause. What moving on to voting, it plays a crucial role in shaping policies that affect the LGBTQIA plus community. What strategies have you found effective in encouraging people from all walks of life to register and turn out to vote? On top of, what are strategies to educate yourselves before you go to the polls, because of the misinformation and voter suppression as tactics has been used within our country today?
For sure. That's a heavy one. And I don't claim to be an expert at all on this. So I want to make that very clear. My suggestions, I mean, we can directly, as you just mentioned, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I mean, that can literally be directly traced back to the fact that the 45th president was elected, because then he had the opportunity to bring in Supreme Court justices who did not believe in a woman's right to vote, despite what they said in their hearings that Roe v. Wade would not be overturned. Their appointment hearings, that they would not overturn Roe v. Wade because it was the law of the land. Well, they lied, and they overturned it, whatever the argument was, but they still were appointed by someone who supported the idea of overturning it. And so that is the importance of the president in the White House, is that they have this power to then affect our courts and affect our judicial systems, even on a local level, because what happens is they appoint federal judges who then make decisions that local judges can take advantage of. It is so far reaching, it's not even funny. So, I never would tell somebody who is not a member of the LGBTQ plus community to, well, no, I would not tell them to only vote on that issue, right? Because that's not their experience. They're not going to go into the voting booth and say, well, the only issue I'm going to vote on today is LGBTQ rights. That's not reasonable to think. However, if their stances on LGBTQ rights fit in to a platform that is let me rephrase that. If their other stances on other issues are still somewhat supported by a candidate that is socially inclusive and, let's say, liberal, then they absolutely should have the rights of the LGBTQ plus community in their minds when they vote. But that truly goes for everything. Again, you could have a whole different episode on the fact that our two-party system is so broken, it's not even funny, and that we shouldn't really be voting for either of the two candidates that we're going to get this year. But when it comes down to it, we are broken, and so there are only two options, and the only option in this upcoming election that does support the LGBTQ plus community is currently in the office now. So to bring in the other person again would completely derail. I mean, we saw, not in the entire 4 years of the 45th president's term did we see a pride recognition. We didn't see anything. So Yeah, I mean, we're just gonna go back.
Yeah,
We're just
because even I think what was it? It's March. Is it March 31st? That was World Trans Day, right? Where I think it
yeah,
also the
Transgender
30th.
Day of Remembrance, I believe. Or
Yes,
no,
and
sorry. No, I got that wrong. I believe it's Transgender Visibility Day.
yes, that's what it was. So, and it happened to be on the same day as Easter, and child
Oh
was at an
yeah,
uproar. And I was
yeah.
like, "What is going on?" I turned on Instagram and saw the shade room. I was like, I said, "Okay, y'all, come on now. Easter
And I mean
changes
the
every year."
reach,
And as a
like
Christian woman, it changes every single year. Every year,
yeah,
this has been in effect for a decade or so. Like, let people have recognition. Like,
yeah.
it's absolutely okay. And then even when you said about the two-party system, I am a registered voter in Maryland, and I learned the hard way. I think it was Obama's second term that in Maryland, where you're doing like the primaries instead of the general election, if you don't basically like claim to one of the two parties, you are not allowed to vote in the primaries in Maryland.
Yeah,
And
right,
I
right, right,
don't
right.
think a lot of people know that you're forced to
That's
either
everything.
be a Republican or a Democrat. And when you get your ballot, it'll be all the like the Democrats or either all the Republicans you want to vote for. But what if you're independent and you want to vote for either candidate or which either side you want to, or another independent perhaps? You can't do that in the primaries. You can only do that in the general election in November.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can do
I actually I said that
so
was everywhere. I don't know that it's everywhere. I'm pretty sure
hmm
independents can't vote in partied primaries anywhere, but
hmm
regardless, yeah, if you have an opinion on one or the other party's candidates in the primary, you absolutely should register with that party. But that's tough. That's also tough because maybe they don't want to identify with that party. I quite
hmm
frankly am tired of identifying with these parties, but I know that I need to identify as a Democrat because quite frankly my life and my rights depend on it. So
Absolutely. Um, uh, for our listeners who would like to take a more active role in advocacy, um, uh, how would you say we could we could do more to help? So we've covered some of like as far as like voting, of course going into it with not like okay I'm only voting for these sole issues, but all encompassing. And we talked about asking questions, but what are some other ways that we definitely can be a better ally coming into this pride? And
um, so if you're not, let's say visibility is an issue for you, and by that I mean like maybe you're not comfortable being visible, supporting the LGBTQ community. Uh, your money's still good. I'll say that to be completely honest. So donate to LGBTQ organizations, rights organizations, nonprofits. Housing is a very big issue within the LGBTQ community because we still have folks being kicked out of their homes for identifying with the community. So um, put your money where your heart is, not necessarily your mouth if you're not ready to be that visible or that outspoken about it. Um, if you are ready to be visible, all it takes is, social media is such a huge part of our lives, unfortunately and fortunately. So we can make our voices heard in that way. So, post that picture to your story if if you see that it's pride, uh post that status on your Facebook to say that you are an ally and that you're coming out as an ally. That is a thing. um Volunteer your time. There are plenty of organizations that need help, particularly as we gear up for an election year. Like plenty of LGBTQ plus organizations are, have a stake in the elections, so they'll be asking for help. But even if it's, volunteering to, I'm gonna blank, but volunteer with those organizations. And yeah, I think that's a good start. Donate, volunteer, and speak up if you're comfortable.
I like that because I'll say when I got rebaptized, I had some moments where even as much as I left my church and they don't spew a lot of these things, but there were certain members or even other Christians will say, that sometimes we would get not as so much of a heated debate, but definitely a disagreement of the I can still show love for people. That's what you said God is tasking me with, by showing love to other individuals. And if he loves us all and we should love each of our neighbors like how he loves us, then that's what I'm going to do. That's why I always say the God that I serve, honey, loves everybody. He loves all of us. So, and kindness costs you nothing. It absolutely costs you nothing. But with I know with social media.
Sorry. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No. I was gonna say, like, the gag about Christianity and religion and all of this is that, like, God made me, but man made religion. So where did the disconnect come? So, I'm not gonna sit here and say that religion does not come from a place where people felt like they were talking to a higher power and they felt inspired by a higher power. But I can tell you right now, God made me exactly as I'm supposed to be, whereas some man in ancient whatever made religion. So let's talk about that.
When I say he made you wonderfully made, darling, wonderfully divinely made. You had mentioned earlier.
I did, yeah. I consider myself Catholic still, but I don't go to mass.
I love it. No, I absolutely love it. Sometimes I find myself doing it, even though I'm non-denominational. Go to a Baptist church. It's just like it's like a habit for some reason. But you definitely mentioned social media as well, because people, like we said, we live in an age where it's definitely technology based. There's all types of, we'll just say, types of information available at your fingertips. What are some? You had mentioned, like about the Facebook status, like posted. But since you all have been, this is a very low question because I'm trying to get it together because it's like one of my former last questions. But we saw kind of like after 2020 and a lot of the different marches that happened around the nation, like, with Freddie Gray and the I Can't Breathe, and also how diversity, equity, and inclusion was like on the rise. Now you kind of see it like going down a little bit. And now, especially coming up on another election year, you see like, okay, like I'm for this. You see that on the rise. And sometimes like, the trends go down a little bit. What are other ways that people, when it comes to supporting just the LGBTQIA plus community, and when it comes to social media, what are ways to, that you personally like kind of decipher out some of the noise and the misinformation, and also to some of the hate, and what can we do to like just like I'm all about like let's just spread more love, like spread more lightness, like be better supporters, because I'll just say I can even work on my own support as well, but better. What are ways that we can do better?
So the same fingers that we use to scroll and type, we can use to Google. And so when you see something that seems off, or something that sparks your eye where you're like, is that true? All it takes is a Google search. I'm not saying that the first one or two sources are going to be credible. I hope Google's working on that, but all it takes is some research. So before you go and then you text your gay friend or your queer identifying friend and say, teach me this, use the phone that you just saw the information on. I would say, so that's how I, because there are things that I still don't know about my own community. So I all it takes is a quick Google search or whatever search engine you prefer, and find out at least some of the details or some of the facts behind it or the research. When it comes to hate, I think what people are really starting to understand, hopefully, is that like what people say with their Twitter fingers are not something they would actually say out loud. The fact that it is in writing available for all to see is triggering for a lot of people. It can really hurt. It could really diminish your self-esteem, or just, it's particularly problematic for teens growing up in this era who like that's all they know, because they spend all this time on their phones. So all I could say is like when you see that type of, hateful messaging or misinformation, you can also report it. All it takes with a lot of these apps now is just a swipe to the left, and you could report something or hold down on the comment, whatever it is. And that, again, it's the same fingers you were just using to scroll, so it's not that much more activity that you have to do. But submit those reports, particularly when it's like blatantly hateful, as opposed to, like, again, the ignorance due to lack of education. Because a lot of the apps are doing the right thing in the form of bullying and, you know, harassment. So those are a couple things.
I like that. I know we've had a lot of like different heavy questions for the past like almost hour, but can you tell us about a time that you were really inspired by your community and why you love your community so much?
Ooh, yeah, absolutely. So I will never forget in 20. Oh no, please don't do this to myself. Uh, I'm admittedly forgetting the year, and I feel awful about that. But when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened in Orlando, um, I want to say it was 2016, and I do apologize if I get that wrong. But when that shooting occurred, DC was in the midst of their Pride weekend. So we went off, we did the parade on that Saturday, and then I woke up Sunday and on CNN was finding out that a monster massacred the club just a few hours before I woke up, quite frankly. It happened at, like, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and, I woke up at 6 or 7. So that year, I was leading an LGBTQ organization, a nonprofit. I was president of the board, and I went to our DC Pride Festival down on Pennsylvania Avenue, and we were just immediately mobilized. Like, I remember going around. It was a organization that provides services for LGBTQ Catholics. So it was a religious organization that I was a part of. So I went around to the other tents and booths that were religious organizations, and we immediately put together this. The organization that I was a part of, and other religious organizations, immediately mobilized, and within 2 days we had a vigil planned at DuPont Circle Fountain that ended up getting about 2,000 people. It's unfortunately in those moments of darkness that you see the most light, and so that was one moment that I was so incredibly proud of. But even just like, even you just go to a pride parade, and I feel like this immense happiness and this immense sense of belonging. And I know that even, allies feel that. Like, nobody will tell you that they've been to a pride parade that hasn't been fun and exciting, because you're immediately around so many people who are feeling proud and who are feeling joy, hopefully. And so I find it every year in Pride season where I'm like, just, I have to stand back and like just marvel at my community, because, Stonewall, which was the starting point of the LGBTQ rights movement in 1969. I mean, we have come so damn far. And while we are facing these setbacks, now we're at the point where, like, these setbacks, and that's probably putting it lightly, they're much bigger than setbacks. These attacks on our community are like, we're like, how in the hell can we even be dealing with this when 50 years ago our community was dealing with the same thing? But now we have the knowledge of that first incident. So now we can come even harder and come together in a more beautiful way, in a more intentional way, to say, no, we're not going to stand for this all over again. You're not going to bring that around. So I don't know, that it was a broad answer, and that wasn't necessarily specific, but that
Oh,
I
that
feel
helped
like every year.
because I know that definitely helped because even when you had mentioned Stonewall, I love, I watched me a lot of Drag Race, and I meant to tell you I actually went to Palace
Yes,
last year for my birthday, and I mean, Florida's on one.
for
That's for
sure.
sure. Definitely saw a lot more of the hate and the spewing. Like, we were just literally sitting in like our booth, and we were outside because it
Yep.
was a midday show, and people kind of like riding down the street like screaming out their windows. I'm just like, it was just a
Yeah.
little much. But saying how the one thing I love about, like you said, even with Pride and just being there is the sense of I can still be myself regardless. Like there is people we're not gonna lie, people are still always gonna be judging people regardless whether we go,
I do it
but
all the
just
time.
there's still a judgment free zone there that everybody is allowed to be their utmost happy, like whatever style, like whatever it is that that person feels like being, and just be themselves in
Yeah.
just a space that's happy. Like I absolutely love that. To close us out, I have two questions. The first one is, how are you celebrating Pride this year?
Great question. So I really do try to take advantage of stuff that happens the entire month. So the first week, the leading up to DC's actual Pride celebration, there's night out with the Nats. So I'm going to a Nationals game that is, celebrating Pride and being around my people that I love so dearly. DC Pride weekend, I always find myself in the parade on somebody's float or marching. Um, and then the festival on Sunday, usually, the concerts. And the concert's not my favorite part, but just being around all those vendors and like just people being queer, I love it. Other than that, that's the end of the school year, so I haven't even been able to plan the rest of my Pride Month. But if
Yeah,
I could,
probably haven't gotten that far because you're just
if
like,
I
yeah, I
could
got
get
papers
to
and
another
everything.
city's Pride celebration, I absolutely will, because I particularly love New York's because it's just massive. Like no matter what the Pride, every single year that the Pride parade is going to be like 8 to 12 hours, just because how many people are involved in it. It's insane. So I
Wow.
love being in other cities for their Pride celebrations. But yeah, I don't really have any other plans aside from like just enjoying what we're doing here in DC.
I like that. Last year I got to volunteer with Capital Pride, and I was like by the concert, and I got to see Monet Exchange, and
Right. Yes. They
it was
usually
like,
have at least a few
Nina,
acts. I
yeah,
I am always critical because they get like headliners who are like just not headliners anymore. And so I'm always a little critical, but I don't mean to be. It's just like I know what other cities do. So I'm like, DC, we should be at the forefront. We are literally like by per capita, we're like the queerest city in the nation. So we should have, these crazy headliners. But anyways,
well, I don't know who the headliners are this year. I know this year. So you said how you're always on somebody's float. This year, I volunteered for the parade and also to the festival. So I'm really excited for
yes.
that because I'm
Oh, that
like,
makes me
before
so
I
happy.
move, especially it is to West Virginia, I'm
Yeah.
happy. But I'm like, before I move, I feel like I need to do like one real good pride here in
Yeah.
DC in my
And they're
city.
changing the route this year because
Yes,
they're
it's
getting
bigger.
ready for World Pride next year.
Yes.
Is
And that was what I
huge.
was coming to. We have World Pride next year, which
Yeah.
is like I don't even know what a World Pride is like. And
Literally about 1 million extra people. Yeah.
these people gonna fit. This
They,
really
I
is
don't
gonna be a
know.
whole
DC
lot of
doesn't
sold
have
out
it.
stuff on the
DC
outskirts.
doesn't have it, but we're going to try to figure it out. And that's why they're changing the route so that it sort of leads down onto Pennsylvania Avenue where everything can take place. But yeah, I'm pumped that we got the bid, but I just have no idea where we're going to fit. Because New York did it in 2019 because it was the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. The
Mm-hmm.
past couple of years, I want to say it's every 2 years. I don't think it's every single year. I know Sydney did it recently. I think Madrid did it recently. So these are like huge cities. I don't know what we're gonna do, but it's exciting.
It is, and it's the nation's capital. Like
Right,
where else could you make a statement
right,
like that? Because and even when you said like the 50th anniversary, I was just like I had to really do the math. I was like, it's been 55 years since Stonewall. Like it
that part.
has not been that long
Right,
for these rights to literally be in effect and then to be on the attack like they are. So it just shows you like nothing really is permanent. Like there is always a way to people always find ways to challenge things. That's why it's
for sure.
important to go out and vote.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly not. I hate when people compare the struggles because they are so different. But there are, it goes the same for folks in the Black civil rights movement and all of these other rights movements. Like, why are we questioning people's validity or people's, humanity when you know when our grandparents were coming up, Like that's what people don't remember, is like the people who are shouting at the kids being integrated into the Little Rock schools. The people in those pictures, some of them are still alive,
Yes.
and like, so it is mind-boggling that we've come so far in 50 years, 55 years, and now we're being pulled back. But it's not inconceivable because it has only been 55 years. So it's going to be the effort. It's going to be the fighting, hopefully not actually physically, but that keeps us moving forward, because it's not, people haven't had enough time to make it a part of their everyday life.
They haven't. And I was just like, even when you were saying, I remember, I think we were at Navy Yard when January 6th happened,
Oh,
trying to
absolutely.
get out.
Yep.
And that was even something scary. And that just happened, what, like a few years ago? Like, what, 4 years ago?
Great.
That was,
Yeah.
about 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm like, that wasn't far fetched either, but
Right.
things happen. And I don't like I don't like trauma bonding or even like comparing the struggle, because I'm a firm believer in my pain may not be your pain, but it's still pain. So
Yeah.
it's not playing who has it worse. It's more of, we can sit here and identify like what's actually happening, but also understanding that there may have been differences within like the time period, but there is still pain and still different type of suffering happening. It just may not be on like a different scale. But a lot of people are like, well, I didn't do it that hard. Or I'll even say, like, yesterday I was out Instacarting or something, and I said I was sleepy to a person who was 20 years older than me. And he told me I didn't have the right to be sleepy because I was young.
Get out of my face. And get out of my face.
I was like, sir, you have no idea what's going on in my life over here. Just because
Yeah.
you are up here in Restaurant Depot moving boxes in the freezing cold, and I'm not asking you a question, doesn't give you a right to tell me I can't be sleepy. Like, that's
But
fine. If
that's
I'm
it
sleepy,
right there. That is it right there. Like, if we could take anything from this conversation, it's like, do not assume anything about anyone. It is not like they are living their own full ass experience that you have no knowledge of unless you actually know them. And even then, some of our closest friends hold stuff dear that we'll never know. So never, never, never lead with questioning somebody's experience. And that's so key to even like working with the community, is like, that's why you ask the questions. You ask the right questions. It's not questioning why. It's not questioning what they're feeling. It's questioning, how can I be a better human and acknowledge who you are and what you're going through, without it being like this therapy session. It doesn't have to be all that. But simply going up to somebody and doing what I said earlier, asking their pronouns, asking their name, whatever it is, making the space more inclusive by just understanding that it is not your experience to question. You have your own. Let other people live theirs.
I think that's almost a perfect way to end this. And
Yeah,
I mean, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Vin. Thank you for your time. I mean, hey, you guys heard it here. How to be a better ally and support. Oh, my fan won't show, but I love this
I love
fan,
it.
honey. I absolutely
Oh,
love
look at it.
I
do
love
too.
it. It's here, yes, and it matched and everything.
Yes.
So we're going to end it here. Thank you so much, Ben, for your time today, and also to your insight and also the education that you provided. Even if you felt like sometimes it was a training session, honey, train us. Let
Yes.
us learn, honey, because knowledge is power, and no one can ever take it away from you. So
It is. And I do have to say, I cannot end without saying, you are looking at somebody who is, who identifies as cisgender. I am a white gay male. Unfortunately, I am like the ultimate privilege within the LGBTQ community. So I cannot sit here and say that my experience speaks for anybody, particularly those who are different than me. And I also need to say that my privilege is not felt by almost many, 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 many people within my community. So I just want to acknowledge that, to say that folks who identify as trans, folks who are people of color within the community, women within the community, do not have the same privilege to be able to talk on this, to be able to advocate for themselves. So 100% take that into consideration when supporting the community. Go for organizations that are uplifting queer people of color, that are uplifting the trans community and protecting them more so than uplifting, because, you know, we can only, what is the saying? We can only do as well as our, you know, they say weakest, but I want to turn it into our most marginalized person. So all that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And even just the moment you took to acknowledge your privilege, I think that was very important, because not a lot of people will do that or acknowledge it, or even sometimes pretend like it's not there. They'll pretend like it's not there. So thank you, just at least for that. And I appreciate this. I am also too, this platform is a safe space, and I am welcoming all walks of life to, you can come on here and we can have a conversation about your experience, because I like talking to people. I don't like to shut up, and I just like learning. So absolutely, this is a safe space to do that. And I appreciate it. Well, folks, you heard it here. Make sure that you are supporting men. Go ahead and follow them. And there's a few other places in DC or even across the country and even in the world. Make sure you're celebrating Pride this month, and I mean, well, in June. And you're taking care of yourself this month for Mental Health Awareness Month. So thank you so much. Whatever time you are watching this, whether it be morning, afternoon, or evening, I appreciate you. And may you all have a wonderful, wonderful Pride season.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.